Hello everybody, John here from the esports department, going over the 4-game LPL LCK slate for tonight. And I think this one is about as good as yesterday's, which I thought was a really good slate, a really enjoyable slate. Let's just get right into it. We're starting with LGD and V5, and LGD, in theory, should provide a conundrum for us, because they haven't played yet, and they're the only team in the LPL that has not played yet. Yesterday, I was under the impression that we were dealing with the last team in Rare Atom, and I forgot about LGD. So we do have one team left. It's LGD. No stats. Let's look at V5, and then we'll talk about why the LGD thing is not actually a conundrum. The V5, minus 600. They're 0-1 on the season, but they weren't bad. They weren't that bad in their first game. I thought they were acceptable, and I think they're going to be an acceptable team, probably. Not great stats. The 1693 is not fantastic, but when you only have one match, the thing that stands out to me, 66 and 100 on First Blood First Turret, and plus 11-13 at 15 minutes despite losing their first series and not having a great GPM. So they're telling you in the lanes, like, this team is fine. Like, they struggled later in the game. That's something that generally gets fixed the longer the series goes along. If you have guys that are talented enough to win their lanes and get advantages in their lanes, the teamwork and cohesion usually comes together later. So you have to feel alright about Victory 5. How do they match up with LGD? Well, that's why LGD's stats don't really matter, because this team is a train wreck. They're going to have a top laner playing AD carry for them in this matchup. It's going to be Garvey, my boy Garvey down there. You just can't think this is good. I mean, there's issues with Kramer having to step away for issues related to quarantine stuff. I just can't see LGD being worth a punt here. It's tough to say that, but like even when this team was playing, they didn't have Uniboy in the Demacia Cup, but they got smashed in the Demacia Cup as well. Admittedly, they were playing WE, who was a very good team. I have a tough time seeing LGD being worth a punt, and everybody knows that I won the 333 yesterday playing E-Star, so everybody knows that I'm a fan of playing those kinds of teams in those spots where you can get low ownership and where people don't have a lot of faith in them, especially when they're playing against non-excellent teams. Like V5's not an excellent team, so taking a mediocre to bad team against a not excellent team is usually a pretty good spot where you're going to get good ownership. I have a tough time being on LGD. If you want to be in the big fields and you want to play on LGD, man, I can't argue with it because you're going to get great ownership. You're going to get Garvey. I actually didn't even... Let me just check while we're live on air because I haven't really looked at this slate as far as my lineups. If you can play Garvey in the top lane, it's tough. It's tough to not run at least a couple lineups with Garvey in there, as bad as it feels. Sorry, let me do a double check here for us. I could have done it on this software too, I guess. But is Garvey listed top lane or AD carry? He's listed AD carry? He's listed AD carry, so that even takes away the only value that could even come out of having Garvey in your lineup. There definitely could have been some weird triple AD carry builds you could have played with Garvey if you could run him in the top lane. That's it. Yeah, I have a tough time really seeing LGD being a great play here. Victory 5 feels like they're probably a pretty good play. The LPL in general, they have a low kill per win at the moment, but it's after one series. I think I would give them a shot to score some more points in this series. The second series of the day, FPX minus 225, EDG plus 160. The line feels maybe a little heavy, but these two teams did play the same opponent in their first match, and you can see their stats against the same opponent. So FPX absolutely crushing. EDG beat them fairly handily, but it wasn't on the same level. As you can see, just advantages to FPX in every statistic, basically. And FPX won 2-0, where EDG lost a game. Now, that said, you have to remember, these teams are almost all capable of beating each other one day or another, and if OMG had won one game against FPX and lost to EDG 2-0, we might be seeing all these stats flipped over this way, given that the teams have only played one match. EDG feels like a completely reasonable underdog to me, a decent spot to go with your money tonight, if you're trying to save some capital to maybe get some V5 in there. I haven't looked at the salaries yet. We're going to go over it in a minute. Maybe you can just get AD carry captain with EDG and V5 anyway, and you don't need to... or with FPX and V5 anyway, and you don't need to save money. But if you need to save money, I think EDG makes a reasonable shot. I predict that this matchup will end up being very bloody. We'll see if I'm wrong, but I think this is going to be a banger of a matchup. So I think I'm going to be heavier towards FPX and EDG. FPX last year were a team that if they were going to lose, you wanted their opponent like every single time. They sometimes won really clean games, but they almost never lost clean. And I don't think adding Nuguri is going to change anything about that. If anything, it probably exacerbates that problem. So if they lose, I would expect EDG to absolutely go off the rails. If they win, I think they'll get good points from EDG. 18 DPL in their first game, and that seems like what I would expect from this EDG squad. So this matchup feels good on both sides. The first matchup, I think I'd go towards V5. Moving over to the LCK, Live Sandbox minus 140 up against KT Rolster at even. You can see their stats so far for this season. KTs are abysmal. They got absolutely demolished by Gen G in their first game, where Sandbox had a much more competitive match. So once again, I mean, the stats are all over the place. Plus 1912, minus 2138, just ridiculous numbers that are not going to be true, later that we go in the season. These things are obviously not going to be accurate. It's interesting that KT Rolster has a 21 DPL and Live Sandbox has a 28 kill per win. It's only one match, and 28 is obviously absurd, and we're never going to be accurate with that. But if that number is even like between 18 and 20, and this number is even between 17 and 20, then this could be a real banger of a series as well, and one that I think would be well worth looking at. It's hard with KT Rolster. I think they have a lot of talent on their team. The fact that they got absolutely stomped by Gen G doesn't mean too much to me. I think, honestly, KT might be a small favorite in this matchup for me. I think it's pretty close. Sandbox's roster also has a lot of talent, and their first loss is also against a pretty good team. Not a team as good as Gen G, but a pretty good team. It's very interesting that Live Sandbox's stats are this good in a losing first series. But this match feels to me like another match that you could be on either side of. I think being on either side of Sandbox and Rolster, either side of FPX, EDG, or V5, those feel like the teams that I'm going to be looking to play tonight. When we go into the last match, DRX and HLE, DRX plus 180, HLE minus 250, I think HLE might even be a larger favorite than this to win. I really do not have the respect that some other people have for this DRX squad. They did beat Afrika in the first round, but if you look at 15 minutes, they got a win being 2,500 down on average at 15 minutes. Like, that's crazy. HLE wasn't even down that much at 15 minutes playing against T1, who looked like arguably the best team in the LCK. And they did lose, but they weren't even as far down as DRX was against Afrika. I think HLE is a huge favorite. That being said, Deft and Chovy teams don't tend to be super high-scoring, high-kill participation teams historically. Even when Chovy was on Griffin, there was periods where Griffin was kind of high-scoring, but Chovy and Deft I do not think lend themselves to being on high-kill strategies. And since I don't think DRX can really win, this game for me is a fade. I don't think I'm going to touch HLE or DRX in any of my lineups. Even though the stats are telling us that it could be alright, Afrika Freaks for me is going to end up being a pretty aggressive team, I think. And them getting a 19 DPL against Afrika in one game doesn't make me think that HLE is going to come out and get wins at the same clip and the same score. For me, this is the fader of the day. I think you want to focus on Sandbox, KT Rolster, EDG, FPX, and then V5 as well. Let's look at the favorites in the stats here. So FPX, HLE, Sandbox is the favorite, and Victory 5. Switch over to just my pool here. And let's see what the projections look like. So they have HLE, at least Morgan, they have right up top there, man. They really like Morgan. And that's been a thing with LCK top laners. We've seen really crazy high projections for LCK top laners. Then it moves over to FPX with Nuguri. Victory 5, the lowest scoring expectation there. They have Arthur very high as well. They really like this HLE team versus Dragon X, probably because it's leaning heavily on these first matches. We do weight towards current season, so this is a tough time when it comes to projections, when the current season is only one game. When you get even into 2 games, it makes a big difference. But we're using some last season stats as well. We don't want to use too many last season stats, and we're also putting some player projection stuff in there. Going to the mid lane, FPX at the top. Victory 5 pretty much showing up bottom in all of these, but once again, we are using some last season stats, and we're going off the first match to some degree. I don't think, for me, I think when things balance out, I think you're going to see HLE drop down in these projections, and you're going to see Victory 5 jump up in these projections. If we had 4 or 5 more matches of data, that's what I think you'd see. Now, I don't like to overrule the projections personally. I think the projection system that we have is just so much better than my just random theorizing that I would generally trust it. But I do think I'd be looking at V5 to be a little bit higher than what we're seeing here, and HLE to be a little bit lower. That would just be my general guess. Looking at the various kinds of cash lineups we could consider, V5 is definitely in consideration with anybody, so let's try V5 FPX and see what we come up with. I'll do some ownerships in a second. I kind of want to see this before I do ownerships. V5 FPX is 574.4, which is pretty low. But of course, I think they're kind of undervaluing Victory 5 today. If we did V5 and Sandbox, 595.1. What if we did Sandbox and FPX? That was 80 carry captain with V5 and Sandbox. And you get 80 carry captain with FPX and Sandbox as well. Could you maybe switch this to get 4 FPX? Is there a way, could we do like Root Captain with LWX? Does that leave me enough money to maybe upgrade like Croco or Summit? Or, no, that's all I could upgrade. Dang it. There's only a 200 difference there. So if I drop down to Effort, then could I switch to Croco? Or could I switch to Tian? Still just going to give me the 3 and 3, so can't get the 4-2 with an 80 carry captain. I assume if you drop down to Doinby captain, then it works pretty easily. Doinby and Fate, and then go Sandbox team. Say get Summit in there, and then the other members of FPX. Not quite, so you might have to play Effort to do it that way. No, can't even do it with Effort. You might even have to switch the mids to do it that way. Although these are the kind of lineups that I think are kind of cool for like especially small field GPPs. If you can make this stuff fit. Can't quite get Effort in there either. The mid laners, sorry, as long as they don't bark anymore, I'll probably just keep going, but sorry about that. The mid laners are Root and Fate are the same price, and Doinby is only slightly cheaper than LWX. Interesting. There has to be some decent way to get 4 FPX here, right? Oh wait, no, you're only saving 200, so you have to play Crisp. What am I doing? Yeah, then you play Summit, and then you can do it, right? Am I crazy? Maybe. Oh, it's still 100 short. Even saving the 600 at top lane. It's just because Doinby's only 200 cheaper. And you'd have to play him to play mid captain. So there's not even really a good way to play the 4-2 there. That's kind of frustrating. I really kind of wish we could make that fit. I think V5 and FPX is probably safer. HLE, the thing HLE is just so safe, and the projections just like them. It's kind of hard not to play them in cash, I think. Especially given that the projections are liking them, even if I don't necessarily agree with the projections. I see why the projections are the way they are. They're basically playing against a 3/5 Challengers Korea team, which is, you're going to see more points from teams that are from Challengers Korea. I just watched the first match, and that scared me a little bit, because DRX did not look like a team that was like there to battle for a lot of that series. But I think maybe Hanwha Life might be the cash game play, even if I'm not going to play them in any GPPs. I'm definitely not touching Hanwha or Dragon X in any GPPs for me. But they might be the cash game play. They project so well versus these other teams. Like you do FPX, Hanwha, you get 617. It's like way better than what we have here. And Hanwha is certainly safer. Maybe not safer than V5. I think the safest combination of teams you could have is Hanwha V5. You get 6-11 out of that. And that's just uber safe. I think those teams are basically always winning. Just because of the issues with LGD. I almost never consider LPL teams to be like near locks over other LPL teams, but with those issues that LGD is having, it's hard not to consider V5 like a pretty huge favorite. And then I almost very confident in HLE. So these two teams together just feel like they're super, super likely. Huh. Yeah, I think maybe you have to play HLE in cash, dude. I hate to say it, because I really just generally don't like them, but I think you kind of have to. Interesting. How cheap is HLE? It's so cheap. Chovy's 7,200. He's like guaranteed to win pretty much. It's a little bothersome for me. The whole HLE team is so cheap. I don't see how you can avoid playing them in cash, and then it's going to drive up their ownership quite a bit. V5, probably the highest ownership. I think it honestly might be V5, HLE, FPX, and then either Sandbox or KT. Let's say Sandbox, and then probably EDG, and then KT, and the lowest two ownerships teams being LGD and DRX. Probably LGD last. I mean, you would think people usually an LPL team is not last, but with them playing a top laner as their AD carry, people have got to be incentivized not to be playing them. I think HLE is going to be really owned, dude. I'm definitely going to fade them in GPPs tonight, but playing them in cash just feels like you just can't avoid it with the way the pricing is, because they're just so likely to win. Huh. Well, I kind of had to go back on my own stuff there because the pricing just doesn't fit the way that you want it to, and it just fits so nicely with them. But I think that's what we're looking at for tonight, guys. I think we're looking at GPPs. I think I would want to play some combination of Sandbox, KT, EDG, FPX, and V5. You can kind of split those teams however you like. Even double dogs from that I think is acceptable. If I was going to game stack, it would be FPX and EDG 100%. I think that has at least some potential for an upside game stack. I would not stack like V5 LGD or anything like that. But yeah, I mean it's hard to argue with the fact that the HLE lineups all go into like the 620s and they're safer. So I think for cash it's got to be HLE V5 for me. Interesting slate. You could go HLE FPX if you wanted to shoot for a little bit of upside. FPX probably has the upside advantage over V5. So you could maybe try to sneak in there, but you are sacrificing some safety since I think FPX is definitely capable of losing, where Victory 5 is very unlikely to lose. But interesting slate. Hopefully you guys have some good luck with it. I'm coming off a couple GPP wins in a row here, so hopefully I'll just keep the streak running, and we'll see how that all goes. And I will be back tomorrow and talk to you guys then. Bye-bye.